Today, we're diving into one of modern philosophy's great puzzles, the Gettier problem. But this is more than just a cool brain teaser. It's a powerful lesson in how we can stress test the very foundations of our most basic ideas.
So let's just start with that big question. How do you actually stress test an idea? And I don't just mean, checking if it's right or wrong. I mean pushing it to its absolute limits to see if it holds up under some serious pressure. Where would you even start with something like that?
Okay, so let's try to get a handle on this with a really great analogy. Picture a philosopher trying to define a huge concept, like knowledge. Now picture an engineer designing the blueprints for a massive bridge. On the surface, those seem like totally different worlds, right? But their methods are surprisingly similar. They both have to rigorously test their designs to find those hidden, catastrophic flaws before anything gets built.
Well, this whole process, creating and testing the blueprints for our concepts, it actually has a name. It's called epistemology. It's the branch of philosophy that's all about understanding knowledge itself, how we get it, what makes a belief justified. You can think of it as the engineering discipline for our thoughts.
Which brings us to the main blueprint we're talking about today. For a concept as huge as knowledge, what was that original design that pretty much everyone agreed was rock solid for, centuries? So the technical term for creating these blueprints is conceptual analysis. It's really just the process of breaking an idea down into its most basic, essential parts. The whole goal is to find what are called necessary conditions, the features something absolutely must have, and the sufficient conditions, the complete set of features that guarantees you've got the real deal.
And what's absolutely wild is how long this one blueprint stood. I mean, for over 2,000 years, all the way back to Plato, philosophers were almost universally convinced they had nailed the definition of knowledge. It seemed perfect.
And this was it, the Justified True Belief Theory, or JTB for short. And you gotta admit, it's beautiful in its simplicity. To truly know something, 3 things had to be in place. First, you had to actually believe it. Makes sense. Second, it had to be true, obviously. And third, you needed a good justification, a solid reason for believing it. Simple, intuitive, elegant.
And the confidence in this formula was just immense. I mean, these 3 conditions weren't just seen as a pretty good guide. They were considered both necessary and sufficient. This was it, the complete, totally airtight definition of knowledge. Or so they thought.
But, as our engineer knows all too well, a blueprint is only as good as the tests it can survive. So how do you stress test a blueprint that's made out of pure logic? Well, you have to actively go looking for the flaws.
Philosophers don't have wind tunnels or stress rigs. Their tool is something called the Counterexample method, and it's basically a special kind of argument that uses a thought experiment, a carefully crafted little story, to find a single case, just one, that breaks the definition.
The goal here is exactly the same as the engineers. You're trying to apply an extreme, unusual, but still totally possible load onto that blueprint. You're hunting for that one hidden weak point, that one weird scenario the original designers just never saw coming.
And that hunt leads us right to the main event, a moment in history when that 2,000-year-old blueprint finally met a stress test it could not handle. This is the Gettier takedown.
So just get the scene in your head. You have a philosophical theory that has stood basically unchallenged for 2 millennia. It seems absolutely invincible. Then, in 1963, a philosopher named Edmund Gettier publishes a paper. And get this, it was barely 3 pages long, but it was about to change everything.
Okay, so let's walk through a classic Gettier case, the stopped clock. Imagine you look at a familiar, super reliable clock on the wall, and it reads 3 o'clock. So naturally, you form the belief that it's 3 o'clock. You're totally justified. That clock has always been right. And by sheer chance, it is actually 3 o'clock. But here's the twist. You have no idea that the clock is broken. It actually stopped working exactly 12 hours ago.
All right, let's run the checklist. You have a belief. Yep. Is it true? Yep. And is it justified? Absolutely. All 3 boxes of that JTB blueprint are ticked. But here is the million-dollar question. Do you really know what time it is? And the answer your gut is probably screaming is, of course not. Your belief is only correct because of pure, dumb luck. You just happened to glance at a broken clock at the one single moment in the day it was accidentally showing the right time. And this is what so brilliantly illustrates the fatal flaw. Your justification, the idea that the clock is reliable, has no actual connection to why your belief is true. The two are totally disconnected. And under the weight of this one clever thought experiment, the 2,000-year-old JTB blueprint completely collapses. So where does that leave us?
Was 2,000 years of philosophy just wrong? Not at all. In fact, this is where we get to the most important part of this whole story, something called the cycle of inquiry.
Because in this way of thinking, a collapse isn't a failure. It's the entire point of the stress test. You want to find the breaking point. Finding that hidden flaw isn't the end of the road. It's the first step to building something much, much stronger. This is where real progress begins.
And this kicks off this amazing self-correcting cycle. First, you formulate a definition. Then, you try your absolute hardest to break it with a counterexample. When you find a crack, you amend the definition to account for that flaw you found. And then what do? You repeat the process, trying to break your new, improved definition all over again. It's a process of constant refinement.
And this leads to a really profound insight. The methodology, the way you test and refine your ideas, is actually way more important than any single conclusion you happen to land on. The specific definition of knowledge is less important than having a reliable process for constantly improving it.
So the ultimate goal of this entire way of thinking isn't really to get to some finish line where you finally have all the perfect, unchanging answers. It's to develop and refine the best possible method for asking the questions. It's about building a better toolkit for thinking, one that is always testing, always improving, and is never ever satisfied with the first draft.
And this method isn't just for philosophers in ivory towers. It is a tool any of us can use to look at our own beliefs a little more critically, which leaves all of us with a final question to chew on. What belief of your own is ready for a stress test?